Hi, thank you. I thought I'd start off by saying something provocative about maybe TED being the beginning of the end for education, which isn't exactly what you'd expect someone who's here to represent the TED conference and TED Talks to really be talking about. And raising the question of whether moving lectures to the internet and moving lectures online might actually be detrimental, which is something I'm interested in right now. And part of the reason for that is simply the fact that people learn differently. We all know this from our own experiences. We've heard other speakers at this conference say that. And there's even a TED Talk that tangentially references that. Malcolm Gladwell in 2004 gave this amazing talk about spaghetti sauce. And in it, it talks about why there's this huge variety of spaghetti sauce on the market, and it's because people want different types of spaghetti sauce in their lives for different reasons. So maybe people need different types of education. Maybe there is value to the live experience and how there's something deeper than just the words that are said that comes from that one-on-one interaction. So one thing that's worth noting, though, is over the years, academia has always kind of looked down on entertainment. TED stands for Technology, Entertainment, Design, and there's this tremendous link between TED and the world of education. But people have been videotaping lectures and people have been recording lectures for years and years and years, right? And there's just something new recently in terms of the drive to look for knowledge on the internet and the drive to look for knowledge in these new formats. And one thing that TED brings to that experience is actually adding a little bit of excitement to the standard notion of simply filming a lecture. You could look at other models as well. You could look at the Khan Academy. There's a TED Talk about that. And in it, Salman Khan speaks about this amazing repository of videos that he has online that teaches a lot of very basic educational skills, math, diving into calculus and economics and social studies. And there are these great tutorials and these great learning tools. And he speaks about it with this quiet authority that at times sounds a bit like a talk show host and is therefore very compelling. And he talks about how the great thing about looking to videos online for learning is that you can learn at your own pace. He gives the example of using the fast forward and the rewind buttons when you're watching a lecture online. And to that extent, it is learning at your own pace. But when Salman Khan mentions that in his TED Talk, I was reminded of an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where the kids are all looking at some surveillance footage, and one of them says, "Wait, pause that." And so they pause the surveillance footage. And then someone says, "Can you go back a couple frames?" And they go back. And it's like, now can you advance one frame at a time? And they advance one frame at a time. And then they're like, "OK, zoom in." And the guy running the VCR is like, "Dude, it's just a VCR. I can't do that." And so just going back and going forward and watching a lecture a little bit faster or a little bit faster might not, a little bit faster or a little bit slower might not be the most evolved way of learning at your own pace. But what it is a fantastic start. And I think that's one thing to look at with all of this, is that online learning is at its infancy right now. There were a lot of stories in the press last year about Stanford offering courses online and people affiliated with Stanford offering courses online. There was one that had a tremendous amount of hype around it. 160,000 people signed up to take this one lecture series. And 20,000 of those people actually went all the way through it. And all the articles talked about this as this huge success for video learning. But at the same time, if you think about it, over 100,000 people didn't follow it all the way through. And that's one of the things you really have to be aware of and prepared for in moving ideas onto as broad a platform as the internet. There was also an interesting study that came out last year by some people at Columbia about the transactive memory process. And it's about how kids growing up with Google are more familiar with the notion of looking online as opposed to the information they might get from looking online. You know to look to Wikipedia for certain types of information. You know to look to other sites for certain types of information. But you may not retain that information. You may not actually need to retain all of that information, is the thing. But we come from a history of feeling like it's actually really worthwhile to have that information in your head, not in some external hard drive. So this brings me to TED Talks. And TED Talks launched in 2006. We premiered the videos online and on the iPod. And it was an exciting time for us. TED had actually been around since 1984. It had been an exclusive TED had been an exclusive conference in Monterey, California, with another event parallel to that in the UK. And only a select few people would go to this event. But amazing ideas were exchanged there. And it seemed integral for us to share those ideas with the world. Of course, 5 years later, 6 years later now, we couldn't have anticipated the iPad. We couldn't have anticipated a lot of technical changes that have happened in the world since then. And so in thinking about knowledge for the future, we don't know what information people will need, and we also don't know what ways people will be gaining that information, and we don't really know what ways people will want to learn that information, but we do know we need to constantly think in terms of the future and think progressively. So an exciting thing for me is knowing that the videos that we started putting online in 2006 still look great on the technology in 2012, which is in many ways radically different. And the ideas expressed at TED cover such an array of material. It's uncanny. This is just some of the things that people talk about when they take the stage at TED. And of course, the site itself has well over 1,000 the site has well over 1,000 videos available for people to watch. Now, it's interesting because when you go to the site, what I recommend is to look to a topic that maybe isn't exactly your area of expertise. Given the variety of material that's covered at TED and the types of people who tend to visit the TED site, it tends to be people looking to learn something new and explore new directions and new subjects. But I'm certain that someone who is an astronomer, who might go to the site, such as, I don't know, this speaker coming after me, might be more interested in some of the other material than astronomy, which, while speaking at a very high level, might not speak to some of the most cutting-edge material that, that's currently, on his mind. And so that brings us to what I want to talk about and wrap up my talk with, which is a few tips and tricks for people who are interested in engaging audiences online rather than just in the real world. When TED started in 1984, it was filmed with a single camera at the back of the room. This is Nicholas Negroponte talking about the future of computers. He's displaying his images off of a Laserdisc player. And if you look at it, it's kind of like a snuff film version of a TED Talk. By 2004, 20 years later, TED had advanced to a 2-camera shoot. We had the wide shot and the close-up, which wasn't really all that close. And by 2005, anticipating that TED might want to do something more with the footage that had been shot at the conference simply for archival purposes, we added a 3rd camera. If you look closely, you'll notice it's an overhead shot detailing the male pattern baldness in the room, but not really adding that much more to it. And so this goes back to something that I talk about with the camera crews that come into every TED conference, which is you're not filming a school play with a single camera at the back of the room. This is a great YouTube video, by the way. It's a bunch of kids acting out Scarface, and that's a mountain of popcorn on the kid's desk. But no, when you're making a TED Talk, there's a lot more that goes into it. And while you don't need to have a giant crane camera at the back of the room, a few things really do come in handy for getting messages across. And I think this is a lesson that anyone can take something from. And I think it's especially pertinent in the world of academia, where, like I said, entertainment is sort of looked down upon because the package isn't as important as the content. But I disagree with that. I think that the package can help articulate the content better. And when it comes to sharing an idea, you all know from the best teachers you've ever had that often when you hear a really persuasive teacher, it affects you on both an intellectual and an emotional level. And so what we try to do is always offer our viewers the best seat in the house, whether they're in the room or online. And we do that by preparing for the unexpected. We never know what some of the speakers are going to do. This is Hans Rosling picking up a giant pole that he uses as his solidified laser pointer to go up to the screen. But the first thing we do is we try to make a personal connection. We borrow from the language of cinema, and we use tight close-ups on our speakers. And we capture them with slightly more flattering lighting than you might get just in a drab classroom. And then the next thing we do is we establish the room. And then we try and connect with the audience through maybe some reverse shots of the audience. And through all of this, what we try and do is we achieve drama. And all of that is really just intended to drive home the message behind that given TED Talk, behind the speech on stage. And so you don't need to have fancy lighting, and you don't need to have all of these bells and whistles, but bringing some of that into a lecture and bringing some of that into a lecture that goes online can go a really long way. The final thing that we do that I think is incredibly important is we edit for impact. So when I'm talking to you in this room, you're looking at me, you're looking away from me, you're looking back when you need to. When we first launched TED Talks, when I came on board at TED in 2006, I had a really good friend who was a TV writer and a feature writer. He writes big comic book movies. You've either seen them or you've seen ads for them or your kids have seen them. And on the side, when he's procrastinating, he procrastinates by playing Tetris and listening to academic lectures. This is just what he's been doing for years and years. So I thought of him back when we were launching TED Talks as kind of my ideal audience. And I thought about how if you're watching a TED Talk on your computer, your screen is surrounded by other information, some of which supports that video, but some of which is a distraction. Sometimes you'll be watching a lecture while doing something else, just something around the house or something else on your computer. So the trick is also trying to prime the audience for when to look back, and that's where editing comes in. And I'm not talking about rearranging sound bites in a talk show, news magazine show kind of way. I'm talking about just simply applying some really thoughtful consideration to knowing when to change from one camera to another. Knowing that when someone says something impactful, that might be a time to punch into a close shot. Knowing that at certain points you might want to move out to a wide shot to build up the suspense for that impactful statement. little tricks like that go a long, long way. So that's my advice. And that's my little lesson that I've wanted to work into that talk, which seems like an appropriate way to wrap up something at an education-oriented conference. Thank you very much.